Assalamu alaikum. I'll start with how we all got here today. So show of hands, please be a bit interactive. How many of us used Google Maps, Waze, Citymapper, or anything of that sort to get here today? Almost all of us did. Whether we're finding our way to places, or we're deciding what to watch on Netflix, or we're deciding what we eat, or we're scrolling through Instagram, or even when we open our phones. The use of artificial intelligence is already embedded in our daily lives. It's driving the choices we make. It's shaping our decisions. It's even shifting our mindset with or without our knowledge. We are truly the AI native generation. So hello, fellow AI natives. I'm Sherifat Shitu. I spend my daytime, 9 to 5, I like to say, helping companies reinvent their businesses with data. That's becoming way more interesting these days and a bit more challenging because us AI natives, for the first time, are adopting the technology faster than we've ever seen. It's changing our behaviors, and companies are even struggling to respond to our changing customer needs as fast as they should. Sounds like a fairy tale, so what's the problem? In 2017, shortly after I moved to the UK from Nigeria, where I was a Big Four consultant, I was walking into a client office in Canary Wharf with a group of colleagues. And I had the security man walk up to me in the middle of the group to find out why I was in the building. I see some people smiling, and you're probably thinking, racism, racial discrimination, racial profiling. In his defense, which you may agree or may not agree, a black, female, hijabi, tech consultant is not a phenomenon he had encountered before. And his training and his source code could not classify this phenomenon in the category of people that were allowed in the building. Now. Please don't crucify him in your minds. Don't be too harsh on him. Show of hands again. How many times have you seen a name and assumed they were non-Muslims? We're Muslims, right? We'll say the truth. How many times have you been shocked to receive salam from somebody? We are all limited in our decision, in our choices, by the exposure that we have, by the education that we've had, by our cultural background, by the places that we've been in, by the experiences that we've had. And just as we are limited in our decisions and in our choices by all of these factors, the AI systems and platforms that we use are limited by the bias in the data that has been used to train them. So what is data bias? Before I talk about what data bias is, I'll start with making sure I just remind us of what data is. P.S. Data is not rows and columns of values. Please don't say that. Data is a representation of realities. It's a representation of events, current, past, future. It's a reflection of our thoughts, fictional and non-fictional. And as long as all of this is biased, the data that represents these thoughts and these events would carry these prejudices. And data bias, simply put, is the prejudice within the data. And how does it come to be? How do we end up with all of these biases? Well, if humans are collecting this data, of course our biases can be infused into the data. The bias comes from who's collecting the data, how the data is collected, where the data is collected from, how the data is curated. And that is where we all have a role to play as developers and as AI consumers to make sure that we are mitigating bias and we are aware of the bias. In 2020, Robert Williams was arrested for 30 hours in Detroit for a crime he did not commit. The Detroit police facial recognition system had matched him to a shoplifting crime at a location he wasn't even at. Sadly, unfortunately, Robert is not alone. Research has shown that most facial recognition systems have a 99% accuracy with identifying white men. Unfortunately, this number is a lot lower for faces of color. And it's even worse for black women, 35%. And I know this because I'm never able to use the one on my phone. Bloomberg conducted a research last year using AI to try to generate images based on text. From their research, consistently, they saw that the AI systems kept generating faces of colored people when they used non-corporate jobs. And guess what? Or maybe not surprising. Whenever they had words like terrorism, they had faces of men, colored men with face covering, with head coverings. What this is telling us as developers is that these AI systems are going to only reflect the data that they've been trained with. We as developers need to take conscious effort to diversify the data sets that we use. We need to make sure that as data management professionals, which is something that I personally care about, that we're putting in place ethical guidelines for our companies to make sure we are using data responsibly and to make sure that we have responsible principles for where we collect data from, how we diversify that data set, and how we use the data. Thirdly, we as developers need to make sure that we are testing our models for different types of biases so that we can easily identify and rectify these biases before we let this data out. Now, in February, Air Canada had to pay a customer 800 Canadian dollars, sorry. And what happened? The customer had a bereavement in his family and had been chatting with the Air Canada chatbot. And the chatbot had made a recommendation to him based on a policy that did not exist for Air Canada. Now, training LM models can be very expensive and time intensive. And what that means is a lot of developers will tend to use pre-trained models. When we use pre-trained models, it's important that we understand the sources of the data that's been used to train the model, and that we test the model in the context that we intend to use it for to make sure that it's not carrying bias that we were not aware of. In this case, this model had been trained generally for airlines, and so it had picked up another airline's policy and represented it as Air Canada's policy. Now, this is all to developers, but us consumers, what do we need to do? We've got more to do as consumers. ChatGPT last year managed to accuse a law professor of sexual harassment. This is serious. It accused him of harassing a student on a trip that he did not attend at a school he had never taught at, and even went ahead to make up a story in the Washington Post that did not exist as a reference for this story. Just a year after, Twitter's chatbot Grok accused Klay Thompson of vandalizing homes. Klay wasn't vandalizing any homes, but he was trending on Twitter because he had been shooting bricks. And if you play basketball, you understand that shooting bricks means you're missing your shots. What it makes clear to us is that AI does not have consciousness, and it does not have a way of fact-checking itself. And so us as consumers need to know that when we're picking platforms to use, we choose wisely and make sure we're choosing platforms that have been designed in alignment with our intent for the usage. We also need to exercise cautions when we interact with these systems. Some of the systems and the platform owners have told us that they would use our prompts to retrain their data. So please don't share your private information with ChatGPT and try not to put any sensitive information in there. You also need to remember that you're responsible for the actions that you take. So while you might use ChatGPT for research, and it might give you certain recommendation, the onus is on you is to validate what it's told you. While I was preparing for this talk, I ran a little quick experiment with ChatGPT. I gave it 4 words, and I asked it to generate me a story. When I gave it Black Knife Crime Police, it told me the story of a gruesome crime committed in the alleyway in the city depths. When I changed black to white, it told me the story of a crime committed in a suburban neighborhood with manicured lawns. When I started this talk talking about my experience with the security man, you can see exactly how that same bias is replicated here. Finally, as users, we need to be transparent when we use AI. We're not laggers, right? We're going to use it. We need to stay productive. But when we use AI and when we make decisions that have been driven by these AI systems, we need to make sure that we're transparent and we talk about it. Now, there's no eliminating bias completely. As humans, we would all make decisions based on the values that we hold. And as long as we remain humans, our values can change, but we will continue to make decisions on those values. Finally, I'd leave you with a quote from Ravi Narayan. AI is a mirror. It reflects not only our intellect, but also our fears. Thank you for listening, and let's keep this conversation going.